Like I've been pounding the table for so long, telling my customers, you need Google reviews, you need Google reviews, you need Google. Why do I need Google reviews for? They're all fake. All my competitors have fake ones. It's just not true. And now they seem to be even more important than ever when it comes to even this type of ad, right?
If you want more volume or you want better unit economics, it's going to be about making sure that all of your happy customers are given a review, and customers that may not be happy, making sure you have a way to deal with that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Answering Legal's Everything Except the Law podcast. I am your host, Nick Werker. If this is your first time tuning in, this is the podcast where we share expert advice on all the parts of running a law firm that attorneys weren't exactly trained for back in law school. Now, if you're looking to boost your law firm's digital presence, you'll definitely want to have a notepad handy for today's episode. We're going to be talking about how lawyers can get started using Google Screened and local service ads. If you're not familiar with Google Screened or LSAs, don't worry, because we have an expert guest here who will answer any questions that you might have. Andrew Nasrinpay, a partner at the digital marketing agency MeanPug, love that name, joins me now. Andrew, thank you for making time for us.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for letting me join your show. I'll give you a quick background on myself. I spent 3 years in-house at a large law firm, Morgan & Morgan, working as their director of paid advertising before leaving, starting my own agency with a couple of partners. So I've been doing legal marketing for about 6 years now and have seen hundreds of millions of dollars spent on both traditional media and digital advertising. So I'm not biased in thinking one channel works better or worse than another. I've kind of seen, things work well for one case type and work horribly for another. I've had a lot of mistakes under my belt. So at this point, I have a pretty good understanding of what works for what case type and what you can expect.
I don't want to talk to anybody who has never made any mistakes. Because if you haven't made any mistakes, you're just full of crap or garbage or whatever. Insert your noun of choice there. But I was actually just talking to this guy on an episode of the podcast that hasn't come out yet. And he was talking about Morgan & Morgan. He's like, oh, the big guys, Morgan & Morgan do this, Morgan. And he was just fixated on Morgan & Morgan. So it's really funny that I'm talking to somebody who's worked for them.
Yep.
I guess that's how life works, man.
Yeah, I think it's easy to point to them because they're the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They're the largest advertiser in legal services, and they're doing a lot of things right. But even internally, they test a lot of things, and when you're testing, you'll see mistakes. The biggest thing is just setting up an infrastructure where you're actually learning from the things you're doing as opposed to blindly spending money. So a lot of that you're going to see is bleeding between two different areas, one on the advertising side and two on the operations and intake side. So you really can't do one effectively without both being done very well.
Yeah, I feel like when you have that big of a budget, there's not a lot of like you would think there's more room for error, but I guess there's more scrutiny when you're spending more of someone's money like that. But so I talk about this a lot, and I might sound like a broken record, is something that I believe in really heavily is parity when it comes to the legal profession. So you have your Morgan & Morgans out there, but I like to help the regular person, the person who went to law school, wanted to put the sign on the door or hang the sign out front, and really be able to earn a living and help their local community. So what we like to talk about here is like, how do we help the regular small solo law firm compete with the Morgan & Morgans, if you will, of the world? Sorry, Morgan & Morgan, if you're listening to this, there's nothing wrong with being big law. Sorry.
You could pick any of the top 50 law firms that are spending more than $10 million a year on advertising.
They're getting picked on right now, but they're never going to watch this, so they don't care.
There's a few things to keep in mind. With size, you also have your disadvantages where pretty much you're running a bunch of advertising and the calls at a large firm are typically not going to an attorney. So if you're a solo, your biggest advantage is that you are probably going to give a better experience over the phone than the biggest and best firms out there, right? So if you're a solo, one thing you have on your side is that you can assume that you're going to care more about converting a client and helping that client than you would an employee that's working for you. So in the realm of digital advertising, it actually works very well for smaller firms because you're not going to need the big budgets to get the reach and frequency that you would need with traditional media, with TV, radio, billboards, that sort of stuff. So digital would be a great place to start. And I think that within digital, if we're looking at Google's offering, I would say that LSAs and Google Screened is a really, really good place to start because it's slightly less competitive than traditional Google ads where you're paying per click and you're paying per lead. And you actually have a lot of flexibility about getting refunds for intakes that don't necessarily fit your criteria. So I would think that if you're on a budget, you're a small firm, and you're looking for something specific, it is a very, very good place to start.
So yeah, I want to dive into this topic because it is a really good opportunity for smaller law firms, solo guys. So what would you say are some of the most important things that lawyers need to know about using the Google Screened or the local services ads program before they really dive into it?
Sure. So one, it's not for everyone. So first, you have to look at what your main practice areas are. So let's say you're doing mass torts or you're doing class actions or something like that. Those are practice areas that don't lend themselves well for that particular case type. One, because they're not an option when you're selecting the practice areas within Google because they don't break out the legal services vertical the same way that attorneys do. So it's not really an option. And two, typically they will be looking for plaintiffs nationally. And for local service ads, you're typically tying it very close to the geographic venue of the office. But if you are, let's say, a solo and your main case type is personal injury and you want car accident cases, I would say that it makes a lot of sense. For things you need to keep in mind is that it's a pretty level playing field, whether you're a big firm or a small firm, where the reviews for your business are going to be one of the largest factors of how the ad rank plays out. The hours and time of day. So one thing I would recommend is getting an overflow service or a third-party call center to take after-hours calls, because just having that window open of being open beyond 9 to 5 in your market is a big deal, because the after hours is actually a cheaper time to advertise because half the folks on there stop advertising after 5 p.m. And there are a lot of intakes between 5 p.m. and let's call it 8 or 9 at night. So I would say an after hour service makes a lot of sense. I would say an overflow service makes sense, because if you are paying for phone calls and you are already on a call, and let's say you're a solo, you cannot pick up that second call. So you could definitely set a rule within your telephony platform to have those calls roll over to a third-party call center who will be able to pick up that call and make sure you're not wasting money on advertising because you are unable to service it. The couple other areas you might want to think about is that it's going to be very, very location driven, where your ad is far more likely to show up if it is very close to your geographic venue of your office. So that is something that actually lends well to small firms, because the people that are closest to their office are most likely to see that ad served in a very high position.
I just want to tell the audience that I swear I did not pay Andrew to talk about using a third-party call center.
No, we're pretty agnostic when recommending vendors for third-party call centers, but it definitely makes sense, because if you can't pick up a call, the level of efficiency on the ad side goes down dramatically. So even if you miss 1 out of 10 calls, and you're a small firm and those 10 calls were all you got that week, you missed 10% of your advertising budget, just disappeared like that. And you cannot compete in a very competitive vertical when you are losing 10%. Pick a number.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's far higher than that.
I'm sure. Actually, I would know. Actually, so I don't want to talk about using a call center as much, because what I want to talk about are the biggest benefits that lawyers can expect to see from investing in local service ads, that they might not experience from other types of ads like traditional Google ad campaigns or other types of pay-per-click campaigns. Obviously, we can talk about how you can improve the ranking a little bit later, but so what are the biggest benefits to switching to this model of like pay per lead with Google?
Yeah, so the pay per lead model is more attractive than paying per click because you're going further down the life cycle of an intake coming in. But ultimately, doesn't matter what advertising source you're advertising on, what the lawyer is going to care about is the cost per retained client. So that is the ultimate metric you're going to want to use on any ads platform. And the larger you get, the more sophisticated you get, you actually pass that data as offline conversion events back into your advertising platforms, whether it be Google, Facebook, anyone. But it's nice to be bidding on a per lead model rather than per click, because specifically for these LSA ads, they allow you to dispute a lead. And that is huge, especially if you're smaller, because every lead really matters and you need them to convert. And let's say you are going after the personal injury area. The way Google categorizes this area is different than most firms. Most firms that practice personal injury may not practice workers' comp or social security disability. And on those keywords, you get all three of those case types. You're going to get personal injury, workers' comp, social security disability. And unless you have a good referral relationship set up, which you might not even want to do because you don't want to deal with it, it makes sense to have these categories because you can actually dispute the lead and get a refund for credits for the next month of advertising. It's a little bit operationally difficult because let's say you're a lawyer and you're doing this yourself. You're both servicing your clients and you're running the ads and you're listening through all the phone calls on recorded lines and disputing charges with Google. It becomes a lot to manage, but at least you have the ability to do that. It gets a lot more difficult when you compare that to regular Google ads, where there are ways you can dispute fraudulent clicks, but it's much more difficult and it's harder to prove that than going through a call recording that you can on an LSA, which you could do that right out of the box with Google software. You don't even need to use a third-party call tracking provider, even though I would recommend doing that.
Yeah, it's almost not even worth it when you're talking about Google Ads to dispute clicks. I mean, how would you really even? I can't even imagine beginning to figure out. And the cost per click is, I know it adds up, and it becomes problematic for like a small law firm when there's, say, a bunch of spam clicks or your competitors are clicking on your ads, and it does add up, but it's almost not cost effective to dispute because you really, like you said, you can't prove it. Whereas if you're paying per lead, you can dispute, hey, this person was calling about this type of case and it wasn't for me and I wasn't able to retain it, so on and so forth. But I do want to talk about getting started with Google Screen because I know from personal experience in talking to a lot of attorneys, and because this is so new and this model is different, that they're hesitant, as lawyers often are. They're hesitant to go about getting started with Google Screen. So can you take us through that process a little bit and sort of explain how difficult or not difficult it is?
Yep. So one thing I will say is anytime there's a new ad format, you want to be first to it because there's less competition. So one area that big advertisers or those that use agencies have a leg up on is they can oftentimes get whitelisted into these things before they're actually released. to anyone with an account. So first things first, get there fast, because when it first came out in 2020, it was way for legal services. It came out 2015 for a lot of contractors and other services. It was very effective. It's still effective now, but not as effective as it was 2 years ago because there was less competition. It's an auction. So obviously the more people who jump in, the higher the per lead costs are going to go up. But I would say the process to get started is one, making sure it makes sense for your case type. So the easiest way to do that is to look at the different categories, or to call an agency like ours, and we'll have a call with you and just let you know, hey, this makes sense for you. This does not make sense for you. Two would be gather all the info needed. So they're going to do background checks on the founder and some of the attorneys, depending on how you submit it. Those searches typically go back for about 7 years, and they're really just looking for felonies. We have never had a single client fail these tests, because typically to be like a lawyer, you're going through these checks anyway. You need to have liability insurance. So again, that's something we've never seen be a problem, because all lawyers are required to have insurance. And you need to be able to show proof of active bar membership, which again, has never been an issue for any attorney. So those are the main 3 areas. The 4th area, which can be a sticking point, is you need to have an average review score of above 3 stars. So again, most firms have above this, but we have seen instances where some firms don't, for specific locations or things like that. So you actually need to build that up prior to being able to get all that through. So the process sometimes can take some time. It could take a couple of weeks to hear back in some instances. I think the longest we've ever seen is about 5 weeks, but typically the turnaround is about 2 weeks. But other than that, that is pretty much the process for the bare minimum of just setting up an account. I would go one step further though, where you're probably going to want to set up call tracking that puts all of your advertising efforts tracked in the same place, as opposed to just one dashboard, whether it be Google or any other vendor. We prefer using a third-party one, so that all of your calls are going to one place before being rerouted to your telephony platform and or any other vendors you use. And then I would also make sure that your intake management system is set up in a sane way, so that big picture, when you look at all of your efforts, whether it be referrals or advertising, you could say, is this worth my time or money to continue in these particular areas? Because no one area is superior to another, and all of them have, on the digital side, a lot of them have like reverse economies of scale, where the more you spend, the worse the unit economics will get. So it's something you want to measure and know when to cap your budgets and to move it to another area.
We will be right back after this short ad.
I really just don't have a need for a receptionist anymore. Answering Legal is part of my team, and it's an incredible partner to have in my legal practice. I'm Tony Grandinetti. I've used Answering Legal services for the past 2 years, and I wish I retained Answering Legal 10 years earlier. Answering Legal's got my back 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. My phones are answered, my clients' concerns are addressed. I can step out of a courtroom and return a call within minutes rather than hours. And that time frame is the difference between retaining a new client and losing that client to another law firm. If you wish to enhance your client base, improve your client satisfaction, and at the same time reduce your overhead, then hire Answering Legal.
I do want to talk about, because you mentioned the reviews, right? The threshold being 3.0, which people think, oh, the 3.0, whatever. But if you're not invested in your reviews at all and you have none, a 0 doesn't do, it doesn't really allow you to lend yourself to Google Screened or LSAs either. So I want to talk about the importance of reviews. And how can solo lawyers sort of like boost their visibility as it pertains to these ads? Because obviously you don't want to waste your time, budget, effort, all those things. What are some things that you've seen can boost the ranking of an ad so that lawyers can capitalize more on these types of ads?
Yeah, reviews is the number one. So even having above that 3-star review, that's the minimum to get this set up. So if you want more volume or you want better unit economics, it's going to be about making sure that all of your happy customers are given a review, and customers that may not be happy, making sure you have a way to deal with that. So I'll give a couple examples here where most people that call into a firm, they will not have a case. They just do not fit the criteria. So they call in and the statute of limitations is up. No one's going to be able to take that case. Mm-hmm. But being able to address their concerns in a way that helps, maybe telling them that, you may not be able to help them, but that they should call the local bar to get more info, or doing anything to be a little bit more helpful than just trying to get off the call and to get on with your day, is going to make a big difference, because the largest number of negative reviews left for attorneys are not even from clients. They're from people who call in as potential clients, get rejected in the intake process, and leave a bad review. So I'd say number one is to avoid the bad reviews from non-clients by having a better process for the rejection. And number two would be setting up automation around when a client is happy, letting them know that they can leave a review. So some common times for that would be right after signing. So right after signing someone is a good time to ask for a review. Right after a settlement. So if you got a great settlement for the client, that would be another time where, if you know they have not left a review, you send automated SMS and email to try to get a review left. But pretty much workflows like that. And anytime a bad review is left, following up with someone, whether they're a client or a potential client, to see if you can fix that. And in some situations, you can actually get the reviews removed by Google if it's complete spam. So it is common to get spam, bad reviews. It happens to every business, and there's a process to get those removed.
I find reviews to be such a funny topic nowadays, because it's one of those things where I just want to like take a victory lap, right? Like, I've been pounding the table for so long, telling my customers, you need Google reviews, you need Google reviews, you need Google. Why do I need Google reviews for? They're all fake. All my competitors have fake ones. It's just not true. And now they seem to be even more important than ever when it comes to even this type of ad, right? But I want to ask you, like, what do you see in the most successful law firms, or the law firms that are having the most success with these programs, Google Screen, Google Local Service Ads? What are they doing on both sides, right? What do the ads look like that bring them success, but also what are they emphasizing internally that help them make the most of the leads that they receive through Google Screened?
Yeah, so it's going to, for Google Screened and LSA specifically, it's going to be good process, because responsiveness is also going to be very important, where if you are not picking up the phone or answering messages, one, remove the messages feature. If you know you're not going to be able to get to them, make it call only, so that you're only taking inbound calls, which firms are typically better suited to handling the phone calls than messages. Two, expanding the business hours will give you larger impressions for a similar amount of budget. And setting up really, really strong process around all of these points, where one, you need to be measuring how quick it takes you to get to the phone. So the total dial count prior to someone picking up, Typically what we've seen is for every 1 second the phone rings, you have 1% drop off up to about the first 35 to 40 seconds. So even people who have rollover answering services where, hey, I didn't get to the phone in 30 seconds, they still lost 30% of the potential clients calling in because they're on Google. They literally have a list of firms that do the exact same thing. So you can't have the attitude that if they were a serious client, they would stay on the phone longer. I think you need to think in your mind, if I'm a serious law firm, I need to pick up the phone faster. So responsiveness is going to be very, very big. Probably even more so than reviews and all the other ones, because you could always pay a higher rate and put a higher cost per lead than any competitor if you are more efficient. So efficiency on the call side and efficiency on submitting disputes around intakes that are not real so that you get the refund for the next month are going to be the most important, that and reviews.
So it seems like the process itself is not daunting, at least in my opinion. There's 3 things that you really need to sign up, and then you need to meet the review threshold in order to get started with Google Screened. But once you get going, it seems like there's a lot of things that you can mess up, if I'm being honest. So I know that you might have a biased opinion about this, but like how you mentioned before, how lawyers should be using a call center service or an overflow service to answer phone calls. Like, I have my biased opinion about that, but I encourage lawyers to set up internal processes for answering the phone. Like, if you call me up and you can't afford my service and you don't agree that you need one, I'll at least tell you should forward your calls to your cell phone after hours, and you should have a plan for which member of your firm is going to do an intake on the weekends. And even if you don't want to do any of that, at least you should know where the phone is ringing. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you know where it is, at least you can get to it if you wanted to. So I'm curious of your opinion on lawyers going about running these local service ads on their own. In most cases, would you advise them getting guidance from a team like MeanPug or a team of marketing professionals? And in your expert opinion, is it wise for lawyers to try and go about doing this themselves?
So it really depends on how the firm is set up. Firms with big internal marketing teams probably can do it themselves. At the same time, most big firms, when they're expanding into a new advertising medium, they will hire an agency because they need to get it set up correctly to start. And it's not worth messing around and screwing up a bunch only to get to the right answer 2 years later and losing that window of time in which you could have done it correctly the first time. And I would say for most smaller folks, it probably doesn't make sense because the fees an agency will charge are going to be far less than the value of the attorney's time to do this themselves. And all it takes is a little bit messed up to make the whole thing not work for you. So let's say you're an attorney and you set up the ads perfectly, which is probably unlikely, but let's say you do, you set it up perfectly, and then you're getting the phone calls and you're also picking them up within 5 seconds, you're doing everything perfectly. And at the very end, you just don't submit the disputes for the ones that weren't good. Your unit economics might not be great. Or let's say you messed up at any of those stages. The thresholds are so small between a firm doing it very well and a firm not having profitable unit economics there. So it's not an easy problem to solve, and you probably don't just want an agency. You probably want help on the operations side as well.
I have a follow-up question to that. Because if I know lawyers, like I think I do, there are bound to be a number of lawyers who are listening to this who have tried Google Guaranteed or Screened or local service ads by themselves without using an agency, signed up, got started, and decided that the results were poor for whatever reason. Maybe they identify with some of the things that you've pointed out so far. So what would you say to them that an agency, like how would you go about cleaning up their account, their whole thing? And what are the common mistakes that you see, and how do you sort of fix them and get them back on the right track?
Sure. So I think first and foremost is you have to make sure it makes sense for their business practice, right? So number one thing I see super often of firms being like, I tried this and it doesn't work for us, is that it doesn't make sense for their firm. So let's say you are a trial firm and you only want super catastrophic cases, but those cases make up, let's say 4% of all PI cases. 96% of the calls you get, you're going to turn down.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have been better spending your time working on referral relationships with firms that generate volume and refer you those cases. So one is to make sure that that type of advertising makes sense for not only your case type, but the type of firm that you are. And number two would be if you are not measuring each of these drop-off points or each of these points where there could be error, and you can't identify why you failed, but you just know, hey, it didn't work for us. It was too expensive, or the cost per case was too high, or any reason along the way, there was too many spam calls, or we couldn't pick up the phone, whatever it is. If you can't actually put a measure to it, then you probably shouldn't have tried it that way anyway. You rushed into it, and not only did you lose money, you didn't learn from it. You didn't see where there are inefficiencies in your firm. So even if you do a campaign and test with a small amount of money, you should at least learn, here's a weakness I have. Here is something that did not work for my firm, and I know I need to make my call center stronger, or I know I need to make my reviews better. If you're not measuring these steps, you're not ready to start. It's not as simple as just signing up for the service and paying $10,000 a month.
You're a lot of fun, man. I like the honesty though, right? Is listen, it's okay that you didn't do it right, but here's how I know you didn't do it right. And I do want to, because I'm a big anecdotal person, that I just make sense more of things when I can relate them to personal experiences I've had. And one of these things that I've had just this weird bias against for so many years was Facebook advertising and social media really in general, because I got started in the SEO world like 9 years ago, and I killed it. I figured out SEO, user experience, digital advertising, all that stuff, right? And whenever I personally launched like a Facebook ad or a Google ads campaign, I never got the results that I wanted, and oftentimes would be in the negative, right? And so I just thought for years that nobody could possibly make money off Facebook ads or Google ads, but my competitors, I continued to see my competitors investing in these types of campaigns, and I had to come to the realization that maybe I was doing it wrong and needed some help from an agency. So I did. We have an agency that we've partnered with, who has since showed me the error of my ways. And so I think that a good sort of indicator that local service ads could work for you is if you have, listen, everybody has colleagues that they talk to in maybe similar types of firms. So if you see that maybe a competitor of yours is having success with local service ads and they're continuing to spend money on it, or you speak to a bunch of your colleagues when you run into them and they tell you that they're having success, but you're not, that might be an indicator of, hey, I should probably call an agency and see what they think about the situation that I find myself in. So that's a good segue for me to ask you before we go today. Can you tell us a little bit more about MeanPug and some of the services that you and your company provide for law firms?
Sure. So we're a full service agency. We do everything from, software development, be it websites, apps, custom marketing workflows and automation around these things. So when we were talking before, a perfect example there would be setting up custom email triggers to get reviews for these services so that you don't have people physically doing them. So software development is one of our core areas. Digital advertising, whether it's paid search, local service ads, YouTube, Bing ads, paid social. We've done all of them, and we have strong feelings about which ones work well for which case types, and have that kind of down to a science at this point. We also do SEO and content very, very heavily. We have very, very high output on the amount of content we put out every month. And we've gotten that down to almost an assembly line at this point, where we have writers, editors, legal QA that make sure all statements of law are correct. And then we have uploaders, where all they do is they take that content that's been written by everybody, upload it to the respective clients, and make sure all the SEO tags are there. And then after that, it's tested by our SEO team to make sure that the titles, the metas, the H1s, everything is set up correctly for that particular page. We do traditional media, whether it be TV, radio, billboards, and then we do consulting, where we've seen the way a lot of different firms work, and pretty quickly we can look at what's going on within a firm and give them an honest answer of, hey, it's not your marketing that's bad. You didn't really need to come to us. It's your call center, or it's your CRM, and you should address that before we do anything together. So I think the one thing that we have that's really stand out is that we look at everything holistically and give a very honest answer of the area that is bottlenecking your firm. Because a lot of times attorneys think it's the marketing, where they could just throw more money at it, but there is typically an operations issue internally in the firm that they need to address.
That's one of the, so I do a lot of marketing, obviously. I'm the marketing director here, but one of the things that we create on a landing page is attorneys will always look at their marketing first and say, it's my marketing, it's my advertising, it's not generating. And one of the things we say is, if you're looking at your firm and you're not making as much money as you think you should be making, the answer might not be your marketing. It might be your call center. It might be the fact you're not answering the phones, so on and so forth. So I love to hear that there's a firm like yours out there helping attorneys identify that maybe you don't need to just spend more on marketing. Because I think that is a problem in our industry, but I digress. Andrew, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on the show today. And thank you to all of our listeners. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we will be back with another episode of Everything Except the Law soon. All the links to booking a call with MeanPug and a bunch of resources from them will be linked in the description. So be sure to check out previous episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and the Answering Legal YouTube channel. See you next time, everyone.